Climate Takes, the Carbon13 podcast, where we look at what it will take to solve the climate emergency, but also get our guests' takes on their industry and climate challenge. This is a special episode of Climate Takes Venture Builders, where we're going to be looking at the model of venture builders, how they build ventures, why, who for, and how the model works. I'm delighted to be joined by two of my favourite colleagues at Carbon13, Puja Balachander, Director of Venture, and Nishul Saperia, who is an entrepreneur in residence. Both are founders. Nish is a co-founder of a company which is now, I believe, unicorn status, and Puja is a serial founder. And we're going to dive into their experiences and what they're working on at the moment in a bit.
I think for the builder, there's some really key advantages. So one, like you said, is just the number of runs at goal that you have.
I mean, that's simply one of the most important characteristics of a founder, because there's always going to be adversity, right? I think there's a quote, you got to wake up and eat problems for breakfast, right?
We have institutional knowledge that we've gained from actually supporting these startups through it. So for example, you're no longer making up what a techno-economic analysis is.
Hello, guys. How are you doing?
Great.
Doing great. Thanks for having us.
Very excited for this. You've got a lot of great stories to tell. First off, though, let's do the basics. What is a venture builder?
I can get us started. So from Carbon13's perspective, a venture builder is where we bring together founders to start companies. So effectively, as opposed to relying on serendipity for people to come together and start a startup that has this massive decarbonization potential, we try to create the enabling environment where those teams can form, and we provide them with the tools that they need to come up with those ideas and start building those ventures with some support.
So it's trying to access a program of support for these founders and investment as well?
Definitely. I mean, I think there's a program of support, probably the most important of which is forming your team. And then there's also, yes, the chance to access to get investment to get started as well.
Got you. And Nish, how is that different to an accelerator or an incubator or a venture studio?
Yeah, sure. I mean, accelerators tend to focus on companies that have already formed. They've maybe made a little bit of progress. And I mean, if you're looking to actually just start a business, like Carbon13, which is a venture builder, helps you from day zero, before day zero, because before you've even started a business and incorporated a business, you got support from Carbon13, not just around finding a co-founder, which is actually possibly the most challenging aspect of starting a startup, but also how do you pick what you're going to solve? How do you start modeling it, thinking about it? And if you might start reaching out to people before you've even incorporated a business in terms of like industry and things like that. So I think much earlier support, much earlier focus. And then you've got venture studios that tend to be much more about spitting out just a few ideas. And typically what you have is a few core members in a venture studio, and they are generally looking to validate ideas. And then you bring someone external in who typically ends up with much less of the equity to go and actually build it. And so I think, and they're spinning out much less startups because you've got a core team really focused on trying to validate each idea. Whereas here we facilitate many more people to go and explore many more ideas.
Right. So a venture builder is more about volume of founders working on startups. An accelerator is a slightly later stage. So you're considering a venture builder before you're at the accelerator stage. And then a venture studio, the balance is you might be coming in on a venture idea, which somebody has de-risked to some extent or done some of the work on. So you're joining it after a bit of work has been done. So if you then join as a founder, you are probably likely to get less equity in that company just because some of the important work has already been done. Whereas on the venture builder, it's completely your startup.
Exactly. And I think for the builder, there's some really key advantages. So, one, like you said, is just the number of runs at goal that you have, for example. So you have so many of these companies, but at the same time, you're controlling for the factor that's the most important, which I don't know, maybe this is an opinion or maybe this is Carbon 13 sort of theory of change, but it's that it's the people that are the most important there. It's actually not necessarily, validating the market. That's the most important thing. So I think de-risking, in a venture studio model where you're sort of de-risking the idea and then bringing in almost the ideal team members, as opposed to doing that, we're kind of trying to optimize for the best people in the room and trusting them to come up with ideas and validate the market and do all these other things. And at the same time, giving ourselves a lot of runs at goal so that we have the best opportunity, both to create the most economically sort of viable and profitable ventures, but also the ones with the most decarbonization potential.
That people point is really that's the key, isn't it, to something like a venture builder. It's how do you find the top people, top scientists, engineers, software engineers as well, the commercial co-founders, those who can build relationships, investors network. It's a venture builder is a people place, right?
And
Yeah,
I do think that
absolutely.
that's where Carbon 13 stands out,
Mhm.
is bringing those people who are particularly motivated around the climate crisis together.
Yeah.
Right. I think
And I
we
think sorry, I was just saying, I think the people thing's really important because ideas change. You get startups, they pivot a lot, but the right people have to navigate that path, and they're going to go and explore. Even in one startup, you may explore multiple different aspects of an idea or multiple paths to delivering an idea, and the right people who are motivated in the right way to really deliver on that are the key. And I think the best investors always invest in the people more than they invest in the idea, I think.
and when we because this also then would reflect on your own journeys as founders. So because Puja, you were doing a startup a few years ago and you were really struggling to find that co-founder role. Like, how was that journey for you?
Exactly. So, I mean, I guess I did an MBA program, which is sort of a venture builder, I suppose, in terms of bringing together a lot of people that have these diverse interests. And the idea is that you do find ways to kind of support each other. So I found my co-founding team. We had a great dynamic. But I think at the end of the day, that commitment factor was missing because people, I was really committed to our venture at the end of the day, but others found better opportunities or found that actually the entrepreneurial journey wasn't really for them. So I think that, an MBA program doesn't filter for that in the same way that maybe a venture builder does. So yeah, I found those people. By the end of the program, when we had some traction and actually had some investment on the table, the other two decided not to continue. So then I found myself in the position of being a solo founder with neither the subject matter expertise nor the technical expertise. Like I was the commercial kind of product person, and the two people that were really bringing most of the value ended up leaving the company. So I had to find those people externally, and then it became really, really difficult to find those people organically. Again, like I ended up finding the wrong people, hiring them too quickly, needing to fire them. That ended up wasting a lot of runway and time. And of course, was just mentally really, really challenging in terms of just our energy and enthusiasm for the company. And eventually, yes, we did find that group. But, it was probably at least a year of basically trial and error where our traction and progress was so much less than it could have been. Because we were just going through these teaming issues rather than actually advancing on the startup. And so, yeah, I think the value of finding a committed team with the right skills earlier on and bringing those people in the room just can't be overstated. By far, that was our biggest pain point.
I think to sum up what you've just said, it's not that a venture builder is a shortcut, but it cuts short time. You don't waste that year trying to find the right co-founder. In theory, the Carbon 13 venture builder is a cohort of 80 people who come together on this program, who are trying to find co-founders, and that teaming phase is a few weeks. And by the end of those few weeks, you know if you found that team or not, and can make decisions after that. Why would you say Carbon 13 is a venture builder? When you look at our mission and what we're trying to do, Why do you think it's a venture builder that has been built and not an accelerator or just a pre-seed investment fund?
Well, I guess, I mean, I think the key about finding a co-founder is a really first thing. I mean, it's not just about finding the right person with the right skill set that matches you. It's also about finding someone who's at that moment in time in that mindset. Because, like, founding a startup is not an easy thing to do, and it's not something that you can just decide one day you're going to do. Like, you might leave a job and think, okay, yeah, I'll go and find a startup, because there's risk, there's there's impact on your home life sometimes, and being able to select from a pool of like 100 plus people who are all in that moment, in that headspace, is really important. And I think that is, and especially for climate, where it's not just about hiring a software developer. You need really, like, this is a hardware problem. You need a really balanced team. I mean, it's been well known. You need a commercial person, you need a tech person, but it's not just having a tech person. You need a tech person who's going to be able to solve the problem in that specific space, right? Like, and climate affects many different industries, but you need experts in that specific industry in that cohort. If you're going to go and solve a problem around water, you need someone who might be able to develop hardware around water, or the same with cement. You need people who might be able to have some experience with developing cement alternatives. So, and that's not easy to find, right, at all, right? It's like, whereas before, like 10 years ago, you're going to go and do a software startup, that skill set is much more widely available, right? Whereas like the specific skill sets for solving specific climate problems is quite hard. So I think the people, very much, right? And then, yeah, I think Puja, I don't know if you have.
I don't have much more to add. I think, that team aspect is just the key phase. Like, an accelerator assumes you have that team figured out. A pre-seed, pretty much you're just investing in the team. So at this point, we're effectively making it so that there are more qualified teams out there in the market to be able to go get that accelerator support, to be able to go get that pre-seed funding. And of course, we get first dibs on that as well by being able to seed those. So yeah, we're really, I think we're playing in a really unique space and really focused on where most of the value is created.
Yeah. I think it's also worth adding the support that Carbon13 brings. It's not just about putting people together and going, hey, go and pick a co-founder. Like, Carbon13 has done a lot of thinking and research on, like, how do you pick a co-founder? It's not just a skill set. It's also the mental side of things. It's like, how do you have the same values? Do you desire the same outcome? I mean, one co-founder may just want to go and build something which gets to a certain level and then sells it, and another co-founder may want to go and develop something and go and IPO it after 15 years and may be ready for that journey. And then also about ideation. I mean, Carbon13 already brings a network that you can go and tap into quite quickly to go and start testing out ideas in a way which, if you're going to go and do this from scratch, even if you've got the right co-founder, there's a potential, an advantage there as well. So.
Exactly. I think there's the framework for ideation. And then I think just because we've been supporting so many of these startups for such a long time, and it's been specifically in the climate space, and like you said, Nish, also focusing on deep tech, focusing on hardware, focusing on these really difficult, hard to obey industries. I think we have specific networks there, but also we have institutional knowledge that we've gained from actually supporting these startups through it. So for example, you're no longer making up what a techno-economic analysis is. You potentially have some templates that you can start with to actually build to do those unit economics and that sort of thing. So I think that's a huge, again, not a shortcut, like you said, Sarah, but a way to cut short the time that that could be better spent actually working on your startup and not reinventing the wheel.
And I think I've heard, so when we say pre-seed investment, that's usually the first check, and it's anything between often 50,000, 200,000 or so on. And often that's to enable the founders to have the resources to explore the idea. And I think if you wouldn't hire those founders to do that job, if you wouldn't hire them, you wouldn't invest in them either. Let's talk about the business model of a venture builder. How does it work? How is Carbon13 funded as a model?
Maybe Nish, if you want to take this one to start.
I mean, there's two aspects. like when you're doing a business like this, you need to you got a program, you need to pay for that program, and you need to and then you need money to invest in those companies, right? So short term, you need to go and basically deploy capital, and then the returns on that typically tend to be a bit longer term because you reinvest in these companies, and that's when you get paid, right? So there's two things. One is Carbon13 works with sponsors who understand that this is sponsoring a program like this is a way of investing in helping to fight climate change, right? So that's a really important aspect of how Carbon13 has got going, and we've got some key sponsors and partners in that respect. And then investors come in to provide funding to actually invest in the startups, and then over time, some of these companies are going to exit and return. Some of that money hopefully will get to a point where Carbon13 is self-sustaining just from those exits.
Absolutely. So yeah, I think we have the standard sort of fund model, and then we have corporates as well that support. So people like Barclays and ARM and Siemens Energy Ventures have been really, really important partners for Carbon13.
When I first joined Carbon13, I was like, in a way, we don't really have customers. In a way, it's not like we're sort of directly selling something to somebody, and that's brilliant. Don't have to worry about customers. But the bad news is our investments in our startups are 10 years. How do you fund the operating costs in the meantime? And we have invested through SEIS funds. We've done nearly 8 million through SEIS funds, and also a first close of an LP fund as well. So we're taking fees from that in order to reinvest into the startups. And, our check into the startups is usually fixed according to the cohort. So, for example, I think the latest venture builder was £150,000. But then what's key to understand is the founders then return a fee of about, 40 or 60?
60,000.
£60,000, which pays for the next stage of that program and then covers operating costs. And from the founder's point of view, until that point, they don't pay us anything. If they have formed the team on the venture builder and do not receive our investment, we may take options, but they're not giving us, say, a program fee. Unless we invest in them, which I think is an important thing to understand. So Carbon13 is therefore investing through SEIS funds. What would you say would be a USP for angel investors to invest in a venture builder fund over a normal pre-seed fund or to do their own direct investments? Why would you look at a venture builder fund?
Sure,
I can start.
I'm happy to take it. Or do you want firstly, at the end of the day, when you're investing in startups, you need diversification, right? It's as simple as that, right? You not many of them, these are high risk bets. Not many of them are going to succeed. And you want to be in a position where you've got at least quite a number of companies in play that to potentially come and give you a return. So you get that diversification straight away, and in particular get diversification focused on climate, right? So if you want to go and invest in a lot of climate tech, you really want to push and support the climate change. Here's one way of doing that and supporting quite a few bets. And in particular, you can be sure that every single company is being asked to report how are you going to get to 10 megatons per annum impact, right? Not everyone who's investing in startups is doing that. And if you're an angel investor, do you have the time and capacity and even know how to go and ask them to do that and vet that? So not only are you getting diversification, you're also getting an assurance that we are trying to make sure we're asking them to verify how they're going to actually have that impact. So I think that's a couple of the reasons which come to mind. And you can go and invest in 10 startups in a cohort with one check rather than having to go and do due diligence on 10 companies. And that also Carbon13 is doing due diligence. is one thing about do as an investor. Often you meet a startup, and then 2 months later you go through an investment process, and then you write the check. We're working with these startups, right? So we get to see how they operate. We get to see how the team dynamics work, how quickly they move. So that gives us like a bit more of a bit more of an insight than a typical fund might have, or an angel investor is likely to get in a startup when they're actually looking at an investment.
Yeah, I think the last thing I would add to that is just you're investing earlier, so you do get a benefit compared to investing at a pre-seed stage, for example. So yeah, there is a monetary benefit as well in terms of the stake that we take in companies. It is earlier, and therefore you have an advantage for getting in earlier as well, and you still get the benefits that you might in a fund as opposed to an angel investment of diversification and de-risking by working with us.
So you're saying the terms of an investment of a venture builder are slightly more advantageous for a venture builder because they're accessing even earlier stage deals. So you're saying there's a relationship between earlier stage deal and slightly better terms for the investor because of the risk.
Exactly, because we're guaranteed basically a certain stake in the venture by the time they're going into their pre-seed round.
Got you. And then, Nish, could you just give us an example of a team where you've been working from the beginning on the venture builder, and you've seen them go on a real journey to the investment committee, which can be 4-6 months later? What's been an example of a team where if you don't think you've had that benefit of embedding with them week in, week out, that might have changed your opinion of them entirely?
Oh yeah. Lots of examples. I think one comes to mind, which I really rated, was Aladity. They're doing science. They're doing crop science analysis, crop analysis to help regenerative farmers figure out the best ways forward. I think Scott and Ukash were great, and they had a good background, but I know that Carbon13 definitely helped them in terms of building credibility for them to find a co-founder, which is a really important thing. And just the support in terms of helping them move forward every week in, week out, I think was quite powerful. And I think some of the benefits that I think about quite a few of the programs, quite a few of the teams I've worked with. It's like the weekly check-in, like, startup is like up and down. Just like I had a call literally just before this, right? And, having someone around you, like who you can lean on a regular basis gives you like who you can go to and voice all your concerns and all your I'm struggling. I think this is going to fail. Or I don't think we have a market. And having those conversations makes you feel much less lonely, right? And I think it's such an important thing in a startup, which is mentally taxing with the ups and downs, right? It's very difficult. So I think that helps them build resilience, and actually they understand at the end of that program even better the value of having good people around them. And I think definitely I've seen that the Carbon13 startups who go on to do well have taken that into their next phase and have done well at making sure that they're surrounded by good people for the next phase of the business as well, which Carbon13 will also be there to support them for as well. So, yeah.
I guess you'd almost have more faith in a team where you'd seen them hit a low and come through it.
That is such an important thing. Like, you see how they're resilient they are, how they react to adversity. And I mean, that's simply one of the most important characteristics of a founder, because there's always going to be adversity, right? I think there's a quote, you got to wake up and eat problems for breakfast, right? As a founder. And yeah.
Yeah, I think there's just so many more data points in terms of both, like exactly the highs and lows and how people actually navigate those challenges, but also how systematically they approach challenges. I think something that really impresses me with the teams that I work with who are doing really well is that every week they come with, okay, these are the hypotheses or assumptions that we're trying to validate. Here's like what we're actually doing to do that. And they kind of bring a really almost like product approach to building a startup. And it's really, and of course, we try to teach some of that as part of the venture builder programming and the support that we provide. But the companies that do really well with taking that on and building really systematically make the most progress in a short time.
So we've discussed, the venture builder model. It helps generate diversity of ventures. Because of all of the support that they can provide, there's some element of de-risking of the building of the venture, both for the founders themselves and also for those who work with them. And this is all to try and ensure survivability and growth for these ventures. And for Carbon13, that's key, because if they don't survive, they can't decarbonize or address a particular climate challenge. Survivability matters for impact above all else. And we've also spoken about the importance of working with the best talent when you're trying to write those first checks, or you're looking who to work with. You're starting with people first. And I suppose, therefore, it's if you're weighing up these models when in comparison to, say, venture capital, it's the deal flow and the access to the deal flow. So if you're an LP looking at a thesis for a venture capital fund, all the way up into the different series, where's the deal flow coming from? Venture builders build their deal flow. They don't source it in the same way that an accelerator or fund has to. That would be broadly correct. Yes?
Yeah, anecdotally, whenever I'm at an event or speaking to investors and looking at the early stage startup scene, can always identify some Carbon13 startups. So I really do think that, at least in the UK and Europe market, we're really seeding that early stage ecosystem.
Just to throw some stats out there, over 70 invested startups since 2021. Several Earthshot nominations for some of those startups. I think the total current collective potential for decarbonisation is 500 million tonnes per year. And we've invested about 8 million as first check. That's 8 million lots of 100,000, 150,000, 200,000 checks. The up round follow-ons, that's 38 million has been invested into those startups. They're collectively worth well over 200 million by now. And this is our first investments. We're in 2021. And I think longevity matters. We're passing in, we've done our 10th venture builder program already. We're starting to recruit for the 11th and 12th. So we've got all those lessons, templates, taking forward into those. So speaking of those venture builders then, Puja, Nish, what is the best thing about working with these startups? When you wake up in the morning, you see you've got a meeting with one of the startups. What makes you most excited to have that call? Maybe Puja, start with you.
Sure.
I think explain your role a little bit as well, actually.
Oh, yes, true. So at Carbon13, I run both our venture builder programs as well as our venture launchpad programs. So in terms of a lot of the content that we're actually providing, I think, having seen a lot of these companies and founded a couple companies myself, we're basically building that content around them and really iteratively building the support structure that these companies need to really get to those results that we're talking about. And so things like, for example, this year, for the first time, we tried, one of the challenges that we always have is that teams need to form in those initial kind of 10 weeks with our venture builder programs. And everyone can network to a certain extent, but eventually you don't really know what it's like to work with someone until you work with someone. And so often we do get dropouts in that second half because people aren't able to eventually work together. But what we found is that we can actually design challenges for teams to actually work on themselves. And so we now have these sort of climate hackathons that we run during our venture builders, where we work with our corporate partners to get problem statements from them. And then the teams get a chance to actually try working together and really stress test their relationships. And so, this is the sort of benefit that you get from working with a venture builder type program, where we are learning these things iteratively and really designing the entire experience to select for the strongest teams possible with the strongest ideas possible going into those next phases. But to answer your question about what gets me most excited about working with these teams, I think there's the relationship with the founders. I think, like Nish was referring to, I think it's really valuable to be sort of that constant for them. We're having seen all of these companies and having seen so many of the ups and downs, we're able to be that sort of calm voice in the room to provide the reassurance or ask the critical questions that will kind of keep people, on that path and staying systematic in their journey. And I think the other is just, I mean, for me personally, I love the variety. And I love how much I learn from all of these founders. I mean, each of them, I think that the thing with being an investor is you get kind of a shallow dive into a lot of things, right? As opposed to going deep into anything. But I think because you're working so closely and operationally with each of these founders, you actually kind of get a little bit of both. I think the advantage of working at Carbon13 is you get to have almost a deep dive in a lot of things as opposed to just a shallow sort of understanding. So it's really exciting to learn about such different things from all of these founders and be that voice of reason that's helping them along.
Can I just sum up? Because you were talking about these are people who are trying out different co-founders, trying out different matchings, doing hackathons, doing different things, working together. So what you've just described is a description of Carbon13, which some people invented right at the very beginning, which was it's Love Island meets The Apprentice. That's still essentially what it is.
True. But we tried to do it in a bit of a kinder way. Yeah.
In a kinder way with lots of HR training. Nish, what do you love doing most when as an entrepreneur in residence? Also explain that role, please, because it's a vital part of what Carbon13 does. It can be a misnomer in other organizations, whereas for us, you're the backbone of the support we give to our startups, and you do a great job, Nish. How do you do it?
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, it's an entrepreneur in residence is here to work with the teams and support the startups as a kind of a mentor. But there's a distinguishing between, like, a lot of accelerators have mentors. We're brought in and we're actually contracted to Carbon13 to do this. So we're committed. Like, you go to other programs and the mentors are doing it on the back of their own time, whereas we've been brought in because of our background and expertise specifically. And so we will have a call with the teams maybe once a week, once every other week, help them at the beginning. Like, how do they get out to the market? How do they pitch their initial proposition? I mean, what you're pitching day one is very different from what you're pitching when you're actually out selling. Because day one, you're not out there pitching a product. You haven't got something to sell. You've got to go and pitch. You got to go out and get interest from people who are willing to talk to you and give their time to help educate you on whether what you're thinking about doing is going to be valuable for them, right? Rather than 2 years down the line, you're actually going to go and say, "Hey, I've got this product. Can you buy it? Do you want to buy it?" So there's a bit of that, and then helping them think about how they look at the market. But they're also like team dynamics. I mean, like, founder dynamics is one of the biggest challenges that most startups have, and helping them navigate that is important. And then also being kind of a bit of a psychological support. Like, I think one of the best things I find, most gratifying things that I find, is when I get onto a call and you can see the founders are stressing at the end of it. You can just tell they feel and look a lot happier, right? And so it's the impact that you bring on these companies. And I think, I second a lot of what Puja said. It's like you learn so much. I get to, I'm doing this for work, but I'm also I'm learning a lot about all these different segments that these guys are working in, and I really enjoy that. I really want that. I want to understand how climate change is, how we can impact climate change in all these different areas, right? So that I find very gratifying and very interesting. But being part of a journey with the startup, in its first phase, is just a very satisfying thing, especially when you see them go on and you see where they've got to after 6 months of working with them, versus when you started with them. And if you feel good, you feel like you've contributed to that. It's nice.
And I think just to put a finer point on what Nish said about just the qualifications of the EIRs, I'm always obviously kind of selling the programs to founders in particular. And I think I always talk about the entrepreneurs in residence because I think it's just such a privilege to work with people who have actually started something. I just think it's so common that on my last startup, I think I did 5 accelerators. And it was, pretty rare, to be honest, to be paired with a mentor and advisor that you actually found valuable. And I think all the entrepreneurs in residence at Carbon13 are mostly successfully exited founders, or at least like very capable operators in the past. They're not sort of career advisors. And I think that's huge. And then the other side is the commitment that they actually make. So again, like Nish said, they're contracted by Carbon13. They're required to give you like an hour a week. And that's so different than kind of finding 30 minutes of time, maybe once a month with someone who's volunteering their time and not necessarily building that longitudinal relationship with you. So I think both in terms of feeding into our investment process, the entrepreneurs in residence just get such a deeper look at the ventures that we're working with. And then the other side is that for the founders, they get so much more of a qualified person who's like a thought partner to them. And that's really invaluable at this stage.
You're both entrepreneurs. You're doing this work as well, but you're both entrepreneurs. And you can see it makes a huge difference. Just like you know what the fear is when you talk to these founders. You actually have lived through these problems. And then I would sum up what you're also describing is just clarity. Can you bring clarity to founders' thinking? Which also reminds me of an ancient Greek quote by Thucydides, which is talking about bravery basically stems from having clarity of thought. People are brave, and founders are brave. People are brave when they can see what they need to do. Final question then. Carbon13's mission is to address the challenges to Earth's vital systems, climate crisis, as well as other challenges such as, for example, water resource. What are some of let's end on either an example of a climate challenge which you're really excited about seeing solved, or you think that not enough people are trying to address, or is there a specific Carbon13 startup that you're especially excited about because of the size of their potential impact? Puja, do you want to go first?
Sure. I mean, I could start with a challenge that's inspiring me, but I mean, I'm a bit biased. It's my venture that I'm working on as well. But it's in decarbonizing the built environment. I'm acknowledging it. I have a startup in the space, so that is
you're an entrepreneur. We just said it.
A big bias on my side. But I think just to make it a bit more generic, I do think that there's just like the things that fascinate me are where like a behavior or a phenomenon just doesn't make sense. So for example, or like seemingly doesn't make sense. So for example, my startup is in retrofit. One of the things that really struck me at the beginning of this was like, okay, all of these technologies already exist. In theory, they already save people money and they're not that expensive. Why isn't this already a thing? And so just, I think a lot of the times that's what I coach ventures to look for, even in some of their ideation, is to look for these things where like logically this doesn't make sense. There's some sort of market failure that's meaning that this thing hasn't actually reached adoption. And often those are kind of like the low-hanging fruit things that if you can sort of align the market factors correctly to make that adoption possible, then you can scale much faster potentially. And there are certain things where like, okay, it actually does require a technical leap, but there are so many of these sort of technologies that just haven't made that adoption jump. And it's because of these sort of things. So I think those sort of opportunities really excite me in the climate space. And I think our companies are really skilled at identifying those opportunities and sort of aligning the universe and the market to make that happen.
Amazing. Okay, Nish?
Yeah, I mean, maybe I'm a bit biased because of what I was working on before around concrete, cement, and taking. So, I mean, one company which comes to mind is Cocoon Carbon, which is taking slag from steel, and in particular, one that's hard to use in cement, but has found a way to actually repurpose that as cement and having stored carbon in it. So it's creating a cement replacement which has carbon dioxide stored in it, which is going to massively reduce the carbon footprint of concrete, which is one of the biggest emitters of CO2 today. Now, I mean, there's a lot of companies in that space, but it's such a complicated and huge market that there's going to need to be a lot of variety of solutions, right? So that's one example. Another that comes to mind is Kita, which has, we talk about market infrastructure and changing the way things are done. I mean, you buy a carbon credit today, you don't know for sure that that carbon credit is going to be delivered. And the supply of carbon credits is not necessarily enough that you could actually get a carbon credit to retire today that is of high quality. So you got to get quality, and then you've also got to go and get. You've also got you need a whole lot of things around it in terms of market infrastructure, and KID is bringing insurance and to that space so that you can if that you buy a carbon credit and it doesn't deliver, your money isn't lost. You can now go and repurpose that, and that's a really important evolution in the market as well. I mean, there's so many others which come to mind around methane and all these other different markets, but there's a couple of them which worth mentioning. Yeah.
I love it when the climate challenge intersects with other challenges in our economy as well. If we think of Matnex, who are using AI for the discovery of new materials, and they recently used AI to discover a new permanent magnet, which are very important for lots of uses, not least renewable energy such as wind turbines. The key thing about this permanent magnet, okay, it was the first one discovered since like the 50s, literally, but it's also free of rare earth materials. If you're new to climate, you might not be that familiar with rare earth materials. They're incredibly important to, for example, battery technology. But 90% of them or something like that comes from China. So if you're looking at, say, the European economy and you're looking at, okay, what can the future look like? You're also taking into account supply chains may become weaker, they may become more fragile, they may become more politically challenged. How can you provide alternative supply chains or materials which will be more robust to the local area that you're in? If you look at wider trends, decentralization, localization, things like that, then they almost always intersect with climate, which I find very, very exciting. We need to look into the 30s and 40s, see what's missing and build it now in order to scale it in time. And some of the startups you've just mentioned, actually, this podcast has also spoken to. So we have an episode with Cocoon Carbon, which are doing cement. Neum, who are doing green ammonia. AI and robotics, Samudra Ocean, that's a fantastic episode. Climate Takes Sea Robots. So do take a look at our other episodes. And there's many more that are in the pipeline for sure. Thank you so much, Nish and Puja, for taking us through Climate Takes Venture Builder. I think when we look at this, we can see that climate is going to take diversification. It's going to take some de-risking of ventures. It's going to take early access to deal flow. And it's going to take venture builders. Thank you for joining.
Thank you.
Thanks, Sarah.
I'm going to stop.